Welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in to a meeting of the Hospitality Sales and Marketing Association International meeting for the Carolinas, joined between the North Carolina chapter and the South Carolina chapter. I'm Adele Gutman. I'm the host of the Hospitality Reputation Marketing Podcast, and I'm also the Vice President of Education for HSMA South Carolina. I have been a member of HSMAI since 1980. Can you imagine that? I hope that everyone will, if you haven't become a member of HSMAI yet, you really should. I can tell you that throughout 4 decades of my career, it has guided me through every step of my journey, giving me so much great information about how to expand my professional development. It's such a value. And I invite you to join us if you haven't so far. And if you want to actually participate in our organization, please feel free to contact me at adele@adelegutman.com. So I have a wonderful panel for you today. We're going to talk about cybersecurity for hospitality sales and marketing professionals specifically, and just for hospitality people in general. I can tell you that I'm shocked every time. Just today, I heard about the president signing a national security directive aimed at boosting security against ransomware attacks and hacking that are for critical infrastructure, like food and water, energy, things like that. So important. But you know what? For the rest of our businesses, we have to protect ourselves. We can't rely just on the government to take care of us. We have to put smart practice into place. And that means that we have to break the knowledge silos and let everybody know what they need to be aware of. I had such a great conversation about a month ago with Carrie Cooper, who I am happy to introduce to you now. And I just thought that this is a conversation I want to take to a wider audience. So thank you so much, Carrie, for coming on. Carrie is a consultant with the Silver Lining Hospitality Partners after working for 20 years for various hotel sales, marketing, and reservation systems. He spent the pandemic year studying information security and ethical hacking and its relevance to the hospitality and travel industry. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for the introduction.
I'm also very excited to introduce Max Spangler. He is from Carolina's own Charleston Hotels. It is great to have you here. Max is the Technology and Systems Manager at Charleston. In that role, he defines and directs all the technology, data strategies, including the selection and implementation of property-based systems, intellectual property protection, data governance, and the development of in-house software tooling. Thank you so much for being here, Matt.
Thanks for having me.
And our third panelist today is Murat Sönmez. Murat Sönmez is the founder and CEO of Trusted, which is an artificial intelligence-based guest assurance system. You have to explain to me what that is, Murat. Building a guest trust metric for travelers around the world. So please be sure to, during the conversation, to let us know what that is. We really appreciate you all being here to answer our questions. This is such an important conversation right now. I can tell you that I personally have had in my previous position when I was in the vice president of a small hotel collection, I have gotten a ransomware threat, which was terrifying to me. I just threw it out because I didn't feel particularly vulnerable, and I figured they were just seeing what they could get from people. But it does give you a little scare, and you don't want to have your employees subjected to that. And I've also had I don't know, 100 phishing emails, maybe more. I can't even imagine how many were blocked. So let's get into it. Will you please share with me, what do you feel are the biggest threats in regarding cybersecurity for the hospitality industry? Max, can you share what your thoughts are on that?
Sure. So the entire concept of hospitality revolves around customers, right? And the ability to know and target them. It requires a great deal of personal information, right? So hotels are usually data troves, which store personal information on thousands of guests, thousands of records every day, which makes them a huge target. So two are the most concerning threats for hospitality professionals today, and you mentioned them. The first one is malware, right? Malicious software, which includes spyware, ransomware, viruses, and worms. Typically, malware breaches a network through a vulnerability. It could be someone clicks a suspicious link. It could be an email attachment that then installs some sort of software on your computer. And then once inside the system, there's a litany of things that could happen. So it could be blocking access to key components on the network, installing additional harmful software, exfiltrating information from your personal hard drive, or disrupting additional components on the system that renders it inoperable. So there's a couple of examples recently, if you're following hospitality style news on this thread. Dark hotels and revenge hotels are two common viruses right now. Dark hotels is an attack vector that affects public Wi-Fi networks in hotel lobbies. The goal is to infiltrate someone's computer, look for any sort of information, and then extract it from there. And then revenge hotels is a little bit similar, although it's a phishing email that has a Trojan horse payload and an attachment. And these are both targeted specifically for hotel customers and hotel businesses. The other one you mentioned, which is related, is phishing, right? Which is the practice of sending fraudulent communication that appear to come from a reputable source, usually via email. So the goal there is to steal sensitive data like credit card information or login credentials to install malware on the victim's machine. So phishing is an increasingly common cyber threat. Guests have been duped into providing their credit card information and other personal information on fake websites as legitimate booking sites, so spoofing Expedia, Booking, or even a hotel's own direct site. And at the same time, hoteliers have been tricked, right, in sending monthly fees or invoices to falsely branded websites. So there's others too. I mean, let's consider the average hotel stay, right? The process begins and ends with credit card details. So they're a weak spot for hotels, as every process, be it online bookings, group contracts, drinks at the bar, or treatments at the spa, requires a payment by credit card. So they can be hacked in a few ways: directly at the credit card reading device when something swipes, taps, or virtually via access to credit card details alone. So credit cards are especially vulnerable and prone to cyber attacks, but it extends further than that too. So back to that conversation about dark hotel Wi-Fi, for example, can be used to access guest private devices, such as mobile phones, laptops, or personal information can be leaked. And considering that privacy and discretion are paramount in our industry, information leaks have a huge negative effect on our business. I mean, the potential is there. So ultimately, all guest data is highly sensitive information which hotels gather and store on a long-term basis. So it's before the guest stay, it's during their stay, and then it's after their stay. So our businesses need to be super concerned about the security of their data and strive to protect themselves and, more importantly, our customers.
And I'll put this out to everyone. What do you feel are our biggest blind spots? Not just for the sales and marketing team, but for the hotel in general. What is it that we are not looking at that we should be aware of? Oh, Carrie, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. I was going to take
problem.
what Max had said and just kind of add on to it and make it really blunt. The biggest threat are the employees and just a lack of training and awareness, because there's lots of examples, and I can give some of, an employee who clicks on a link, or an employee who gets an email that looks like it's from the CEO and it turns out it's not, and just the things that could be solved just by looking at the email address and making sure it's actually from the right URL or a recognized email address. There's a lot of instances of things like that, and everyone can fall victim to them. I mean, I've gotten a lot of phishing emails especially over the last year, and a lot of them are very convincing. Like, you actually think it's from, eBay or Amazon or something like that. And next thing something just might seem a little off. So getting the employee trained to just recognize when there may be something a little bit suspicious, and that just isn't second nature to most of us. So
getting into the habit, even when we don't suspect it, of just hovering over that link to the email, sometimes that can reveal an email address that doesn't make any sense.
right, and like I said, you can't really blame anyone, and it just takes practice and training. That's really all there is to it.
What's shocking to me is when people show emails that came from my email. How is this possible? I just can't understand it. It is pretty terrifying. So, best practices. What is it that you feel we need to do right now? What can you tell people that are watching this now? Some best practices or action steps that we can take in order to secure and protect our employees, our business, and our customers. Anybody?
If I take on this, Adil, I think the best practice is to get the employees aware of the cybersecurity first. It is just a couple of hours program. You can run like once in a year. Educate and train your employees first. How to protect their data, how to protect guest data. Guest is coming to hotels or property to stay and making their temporary home. And they log into the systems. They log into the smart TV, they log into the Google account, Yahoo account, all Google TV and everything. Like whatever they do at home, they do in the hotel. But when they check out, they mostly forget to log out. So they leave these vulnerable credentials logged in, and someone coming in the next, if it is not cleared out, if it's not logged out properly, this could be a very big threat to the, and previous guest would be a victim. So there must be a house cleaning after each and every guest checks out. Before the next guest checks in, you need to clean out all the digital footprint of the guest. Like you are fixing the bed, you also need to fix the digital footprint of the previous guest, and train the employees how to do that. It is very simple program that you hire someone to do this, how to protect your data, how to protect guest data, and also whom has right to access the right data. So this is, I think, to me, the most important part, and then very easy way to raise the awareness. Thank you.
That's great. And you know what? There are so many great communication tools and technologies where you can actually have a course or a training program and some best practices and bullet points right on your employees' phones, and they can access them, and the HR person or the IT person can actually check that every employee has actually gone through that program, so that you know that you're complying with whatever you need to. Let's see. But Max, you probably have some best practices also and tips that you want to share.
Yeah, absolutely. So passwords is a big one, right? In almost every organization, there's numerous instances of weak, default, or reused passwords that are often stored or transferred, displayed in the clear, right? So like, make sure your password is unique, obviously. Make sure it's long and memorable. Avoid password reuse. So don't use the same password for a lot of different services. Maybe consider using a password manager like 1Pass, or there's a ton of them out there. But if you manage a lot of different accounts and you feel overwhelmed with how am I going to manage all these, I don't feel good about keeping my password saved in the browser, but you still want a more secure solution. There are some super good enterprise grade encrypted password managers out there that are super intuitive to use. And then also avoid any sort of personal information in your password, right? Like you don't know what people are going to have access to if you become a target. So you'd be surprised what information is out there if you just Google your name, right? Your address, your birthday, all sorts of stuff. A lot of people use that as primary components in their password, which makes it that would be your first target, right? Like my birthday plus my last name, or it just my street address plus my
Your
last
dog.
name. Exactly. Yeah, it goes on and on. So passwords are huge. And then to take it to the next level would be to use multi-factor authentication, or MFA. And most people in the audience probably have heard of it, but turning that on for as many of your accounts as possible is good. And many of you probably already use it ultimately. For example, if you go to sign into a bank account, probably if you haven't signed in for a while, or if you're signing in with a new device or from a new location, it's going to send you a text message to your phone. And that text message is going to have a code, and then you're going to enter that code into the browser. That's the idea, is just an additional layer of security to prove you are who you say you are before giving you access to that resource. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a text message to your phone. There's authenticators like Duo or the Google Authenticator, which have a code in there, a timed code that expires every 30 seconds. Or it could be one of those questions, what's your mother's maiden name, or what was your first pet, etc., that just require a little bit more information besides just entering in a password. Those are two big ones. There's some other things you can do from the hardware level too. So with your workstation, if you're a Windows user, encrypt your hard drive with BitLocker. That's a big one. It basically encrypts all the data on your hard drive at rest. So in case you were to lose your computer and someone tries to tamper with your hard drive to get into it, there's another layer of security on top of that. Or if you're an Apple user, using FileVault 2, which is an equivalent product.
BitLocker or Firewall 2, that sounds great. That would definitely give me some comfort level, especially for sales and marketing people who are traveling with their laptops everywhere. And
For sure.
things happen, things happen. Carrie, if you unmute yourself.
I keep talking on mute. I'm sorry.
Thank
no,
you.
I was just going to say both of those.
Go ahead.
Both of those tools are built into the system. So BitLocker is built into Microsoft, and FileVault is built into Mac. So you don't have to install or add anything additional. The other thing I was going to say is just updating things. I know we always think it's a pain when you see, oh, there's a new, there's a Windows update, and you may have clicked delay or, remind me later on your Mac a bunch of times. But getting those updates in timely, because 9 times out of 10, there is some kind of a security update in there. And then making sure your other devices are up to date as well, so that your phone, be it Android or iOS, has the latest and greatest version and security updates. And I know we all like to put some of that off sometimes, or you're like, oh, is this going to overwhelm my phone, or do I have enough memory or whatever? Just, you've got to do it. That's just all there is to it.
Yeah. And I hate updating my passwords. I hate having so many passwords. So it's comforting to know that it's comforting to know that you can have actually a tool or a password manager, and it's not, but is Google Password Manager, Carrie, do you think, is that as good as using LastPass, or are there some that are really better than others?
The thing about Google is it's in your browser. So if someone has access to your browser, they may then just have access to that. Whereas, if my computer is shut down and somebody somehow gets into it, they've got to jump through several hoops to get into my password manager in order to log into it. Because I have to log in on the web, and then I have to log in with the app. And then because it's the password manager, the password isn't saved in it. So I have to have a password that I memorized. And what I did is I just made up a simple sentence. It's like 4 words long that I can remember to use that to get in, because it's got a lot of characters and it's going to be nearly impossible for someone to guess it, but I can easily remember it. I'm a horrible speller though, so if I spell the word wrong, I've gotten in trouble. But yeah, if you need one and there's nowhere to save it or spare it, just make up a simple 4 or 5 word sentence that you can remember and use that.
And
that's
also,
what I do with sentences, and then I change certain letters to certain characters. So even
I've done
then,
that too.
they're not going to guess.
Yeah.
But I only use the first letter from each thing. But you could use the second letter or the third letter. There are so many clever things. You can Google, tips how to make great
and
passwords.
never save your password on a browser either. I mean, browser will remind you want to save your password. The answer should be no, never. Never save your password on a browser. Don't get lazy just by typing it yourself each and every time. If the browser is compromised for some reason, it's just terrible.
Yeah, I think we've all been a little bit lax in that regard. We've made things easier for ourselves, but now it's time to get serious. So Perry, I'm just going to go back to that, changing your password, making sure you're doing the updates, because there could be some extra security built into those updates. But if you were a general manager or director of sales and marketing or IT person at a hotel, what other action steps would you take to make sure you're protecting your team and your consumer data and your guests?
Well, as it affects mostly the sales and marketing team, or which is probably the majority of the people that are going to be watching this, if you work from home, there's a lot of things you need to do to make sure your home network is secure. And if you've got access to an IT team, I would like to think that they would have written policies and training for you to make sure that your home router is set up properly and that your computer that you use for work, ideally you would have a completely separate computer and phone that you only use for work. I realize that may not be realistic, especially with the phone. And then a lot of people are self-employed. And so there's a lot of resources and there's some money that needs to be spent, but sometimes it can be worth it. But as far as the organization is concerned, like if I was the general manager of a hotel or the IT person in charge of a property or group of properties, there would have to be a written system and rules and training that would go along with that. And if you don't have that, I would reach out to your general manager or your IT person or that team and just see, what they can do to walk you through it, what training is available, and nudge your company in the direction of making sure that happens. With maybe biannual or every quarter there's an update, and then to start out just to make sure that everything is as secure as possible from the get-go. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what's kind of top of mind for me, is just making sure everyone knows what's expected, and then everyone has the tools. I mean, there's antivirus, there's firewalls, there's all these things that we can go into, but at the end of the day, they aren't necessarily something that you really have to focus on. It needs to be done, but I don't think the salesperson or the marketing person is going to be focusing on that all the time. That's where the IT team and the written policies and all that come in.
What about the separation between where the PMS is and where the guests are? You know what I mean? No.
I'm happy to answer, but if somebody else wants to answer, that's fine. No, I was just gonna say there's
like
a thing
we always have like two places you can sign in. And I always worry that that's getting crossed over. If somebody has a problem getting in one way, they end up getting in the other way.
Well, a lot of times on your home network, you can have a guest network and then you can have the primary one. Most routers come with that automatically. I would recommend setting up the primary one for you and only really using that if you work from home with your work devices, and let the guest one be for other things. Or if you have like a smart TV, Alexa, whatever, put that on the guest network so it's not on the same network as your computer and your critical things like that. In the hotel, obviously to have the Wi-Fi network for the guests completely separate and not touching the network that the PMS and all the other computer systems is on is a very good idea. And it just is one less way for, they call it an air gap. So there's no connection between those two networks. So there's no way for someone who gets into one to get into the other.
Is it different, Murat, for vacation rentals?
Yeah, in vacation rentals, it is a totally different dynamics.
We're in the Carolinas, so I know there are vacation rental interested people always on the call.
Protecting guests is the same, whether it is a hotel or the short-term rental guests are the guests, right? It's just different properties. I think short-term rentals is a little bit vulnerable to the personal data breach and personal privacy concerns. That is like in home network, you only have, if you are managing 1, 2, 4, 5 properties, that you have a separate network in each one of them. There is no centralized system. Basically, each property runs its own network. and it makes it much more vulnerable against the attacks and against the identity theft. There's a big job for property managers, as I said earlier, to go each and after property to log them out, because guests leave their credentials in. Sometimes they don't care. They just leave Google account on. They leave their Netflix on. They leave on YouTube TV on. So someone needs to go there and just log them out one by one, and then make it clear and available for next guest. So there are a little bit manual work to do in short-term rental than compared to hotel. In hotel, you have a separate networks for, as Carol said, separate networks for Wi-Fi for the guests and for the PMS, but that's not the case always in short-term rental.
Maybe we also need to somehow at the end of the stay or on the last day have some sort of a message saying, don't forget to log out of your Netflix account or whatever else that they might have been using during their stay, even though we can't rely on that. But it could be a double check to avoid that kind of a problem. If we just communicate with, maybe it'll be good if travelers get into the habit of that. Maybe they're not aware themselves of those things. I know that you spoke before about having an educational program for the team, whether it's in person annually or perhaps on demand on a training system that the members of the team have access to. Other than a few of the things that you've already mentioned, is there anything else that you'd like to add? Some points of the kind of thing that would be on that training program?
After training program, one step further, that what you can do is that you test yourself how vulnerable your network is. Basically, you hire someone, some company, you do what they call vulnerability test or penetration test. Basically, you have your IPs tested by someone professionally, that if you can be compromised or if you are compromised already. This is the next step, ensuring that your network is safe and secure for employees and for the guests as well. So when you have this program, you can go deep and very detailed, that you can also design your access policy for the employees to the guest data. So there are lots of things you can do depending on how big your enterprise is. So yes, it is now IoT, what's called Internet of Things, are everywhere now, and smart devices are everywhere, and hotels are deploying many more smart devices. Each one requires authentication and login credentials. So it becomes a separate task to maintain those, to comply with your security policies, Adil. So it is a serious job to make sure guest comes in, checks out, comes in clean, checks out clean.
So just because we're having this conversation doesn't mean you shouldn't make sure you bring in a professional at some point or another to double check that we're doing the right thing. What kind of testing are you doing, Max, at your hotels?
Yeah, so I mean, the biggest part, and Carrie touched on this, there's a lot of common sense. Employee training is the single biggest part, right? And it's even more pronounced for us because of the high turnover right now. So there's a ton of people rotating through line level, supervisory and managerial positions. So this training, if you weren't doing it frequently before, you have to be doing it even more frequently now just to keep pace with the turnover, because you could have someone leave in a key position and that person suddenly is vulnerable because they don't have access to the same guide, resources, and mentorship that some of the other team members had previously. And then, like on a similar note, related to the training, but also, hoteliers and hotel management companies in general need to have a good grasp on when people come and go, what are you doing with that person's workstation, right? So how are you provisioning and deprovisioning users? Do people still have access to key systems after they go? We have a lot of internal mechanisms that are able to, with essentially the flick of a switch, clamp down access for a specific user or a specific group of users if there's a change. So we're adding a hotel, we're removing a hotel, or someone's leaving in an apartment or at a hotel, thinking carefully through a workflow so that you can quickly manage at scale people's ability to have access to the tools and resources they need to do their job is key, because you should be super conservative when it comes to granting access, right? Some of the other speakers touched on this, but you only want to give access to only the things that those people need to do their job. And privacy is always a balance between security, right? There's going to be friction at a lot of junction points. People are going to want to have access to everything because they seem to think it makes their jobs easier. In some cases, it does make their jobs a little bit easier, but then it creates a single point of failure or a vulnerability where the whole thing can come crashing down because someone has access to too many things. So to answer your question, giving people the big picture, right? So we like to have a lot of communication with our team members, just how important their role is as it relates to our entire architecture. And we provide supplemental advice and webinars that are super valuable, but not too technical, right? Because hotel team members have to digest enough information as it relates to HR best practices and just basically booking room rates, etc., that to layer on another cybersecurity talk is just one thing that probably, after working a double shift, because so many of our team members right now are working a ton, they're tired, and it's either not going to stick, the information that they're reading, or they're going to be so tired that they're going to be more susceptible to, say, clicking a malicious link, even though they have been trained, right? So making sure your team members are well rested so that they can make the best decisions when they're actually in their job is super critical too.
I like that thinking. Harry, can you share with us a few stories that could open our eyes to some of the vulnerabilities that hotels have been surprised to encounter in terms of cybersecurity?
Yeah, so we've been talking about social engineering a lot, and that's basically someone from the outside figuring out enough about either an individual employee or company culture or whatever to be able to try to trick somebody into doing something, or even just to be able to get a vulnerability on their computer so that when they get back to work, plug into the network, they can get in. So one example that I'd heard about was there was a guy and please, if your Facebook is open to the public, make it friends only. There's no reason that anybody in the public should be able to go to your Facebook page and see what your hobbies are, where you live, where you work, all that. So have that locked down. And this particular person didn't do that. And the person who was going to hack their company system went to their Facebook page, saw that they belonged to a bowling league, went to that bowling league's website, and that bowling league's website hadn't been updated since like 2008. And it was extremely vulnerable, and like it didn't go to mobile. It just was what it was. But it was just for a bowling league to reserve a lane or something. There was no credit cards going through it. But it was so vulnerable that the hacker just installed a little program in one of the frames of the pages of the website. The employee was at home on their laptop. They went to the bowling alley webpage. They picked that up on their laptop. They went to work. They plugged in, and the hacker was able to get into their systems. So I always say your system is only as safe as the least secure website one of your employees clicks on. So that's part of it. Another example was an employee at a company I used to work with got an email that was very clever. See, this is the other thing. You look at the URL and maybe you don't notice a double letter or two L's instead of one L, or they just add some little dot somewhere that throws it, and you don't realize that it's not the proper URL. And because this person knew enough about the owner of the company and this particular employee, they were able to trick the employee into wire transferring a bunch of money that ended up being just gone forever. So that wasn't even a hack, but the hacker or the person just tricked them into giving them their money just via email. And then the other example was at a hotel, and it has to do with that, keeping your system separate and making sure everything is locked down. There's a lot of Internet of Things devices, IoT is what you'll hear, in these hotel rooms, from blinds that can be automatically opened and closed, the climate control, all of that. And maybe either keeping that on a separate network And you don't have to build a completely separate network. There are subnets that will substitute that. That's something for the IT person to figure out. The employees don't need to worry about it. But those are the kind of things that need to be set up, because at a hotel, they had a big, beautiful, fancy aquarium, and they had an internet-connected fish feeder, automatic fish feeder on the aquarium. And somebody figured that out while they were staying there and went through the fish feeder and into the main system, and were able to compromise guest data. So
That's crazy.
keeping systems separate and making sure that there's web pages where you can look at everybody's Ring camera that they haven't, that hasn't set up a password and a login and password on it. I mean, all of this vulnerability that really just logical. Just make sure when you're setting things up, make sure when you get your router from your cable company, you change the login and password on it. Google it, look up the help pages on your router. You usually can figure it out. If you can read, I say you can figure it out.
Some of us need help no matter what. Ay. You know what? It's very hard. I know you say keep your social media just to your friends, but we're sales and marketing people. We can't do that. We use sales and marketing for our jobs, and we make personal connections with all the travel agents we know, with all the meeting planners.
Well, that's
we
true,
know.
but you can make it so that they have to look for you and find you and be your friend before they can see your information. So like you can, you become friends, you have lunch with a travel agent and you decide to become friends with them on Facebook, that's fine. I'm just saying, just don't leave it open to the public where anybody can just go to your page and scroll through, see the pictures of you, your kids, where you live, what you do. I mean, that's just opening yourself up to too many vulnerabilities.
So this is really a time we need to re-examine our priorities and make changes. You can't do things the way you used to do them anymore if we want to heighten our security. You were going to say something, Max? Oh, I thought you sounded like you were.
Agree. I agree with Carrie. Well said. No anecdotes from me.
Absolutely.
Well, that's the other thing about LinkedIn. LinkedIn and Twitter kind of work like everything is open to the public. So if you're doing this for work, just make sure that your LinkedIn is only, or your Twitter and your Instagram, that's what I was trying to say, Instagram, is travel photos. If you work in travel, it's photos of the hotel, and that if you're going to use it for work. If you want to have personal, I would do a separate one for your personal and your family, and then make it so that they have to, request permission, and not just some random person can go on your Instagram and again, see all the pictures of your family and stuff. I would just keep it very separate.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm always a little bit insecure. We're collecting data from our guests, and we're trying to customize everything for them. I mean, what is it that you track, Max, at your hotels? Is there something that you don't track? Do you have any suggestions regarding anything we need to be aware of in our communications?
Yeah, from a sales and marketing perspective, you're probably not tracking anything more than's already being collected from you actively when you're browsing the internet or going to any site, right? More information is being collected on you at a daily, minute basis on your smartphone or via web browser than you could possibly collect from any potential prospecting target that you're going after in the hospitality space. I would say, consumers now more than ever are focused on privacy and data protection, and it goes for the clients you're going after, right? It's why you can opt out of tracking on your iPhone. It's why every website you go to now has cookie policies that you have to accept or deny. Collectively, there's a push to empower customers with their data, right? So consumers increasingly hold us, hoteliers, who are holding their data responsible for if there may be a breach. And that breach, if there is one that happens, has a major effect on the efforts of sales and marketing, right? Brand damage from an optics perspective may not ever be recovered from if information is spilled out on the web and consumers then are having their credit card data compromised or their guest information compromised. So marketing teams, in my mind, maybe less so from a tracking standpoint, but more so in the sense that the sales and marketing team should be some of the biggest advocates when it comes to cybersecurity best practices. Just because from the standpoint of if there is a breach, they're going to have the hardest time actually being able to prospect and sell anything moving forward. So as you are collecting data, you should be consulting with your IT team, whether it's internal or it's a managed service provider that your company works with, but making sure that any information you do collect is stored in a super secure way that only you have access to or your team has access to, and you're regularly checking and auditing who has access to it. Has anyone downloaded it? If you have those kind of granular controls where you can see it. Imagine someone on your team, unfortunately, maybe, someone's leaving. Do they take an entire list of contacts with them, right? Like, how do you safeguard against that? Because you're not sure what they're going to do with it.
Yeah, a lot of times they're on, I don't know, Dropbox or something like that. It probably doesn't take much to figure out how to keep it. Yeah, there are so many things to think about. It is mind-boggling. I was just wondering, is there anything else, any action point or tip that anybody would like to share before we close that our teams can take home with them and do today? Let me ask this, is there perhaps anything that you do as a habit that other people don't do that makes you more secure than the average person?
I follow all of my own advice, of course.
Well, for example, like, I wonder, I've only very recently, after seeing some sort of very odd video on YouTube or Facebook or one of those things, where with a whole group of people following a person around as they shop, it was kind of scary. So I've only very recently stopped saying yes, 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 I agree to everything. I don't see myself reading 117 pages of terms and conditions every time there's an update, but I do uncheck a lot of things lately. Is there anything else like that that you may be doing more than other people that we should learn some good habits?
I would say, other than keep everything locked down, keep your Facebook personal, and if you need to do one for work or something, maybe make a separate instance or occurrence of it and leave more personal information off of it. As I said before, make sure all of your devices are updated and on the latest and greatest version of the software and have all the security updates. I thought of a third one, but it just left. So come
No
back to
worries.
me. I'll think of it.
Murat, anything for you?
Regardless what I do, I have a simple suggestion. Those can be practiced. Never use a simple password. Never use a part of your identity as a password, like your birthday, your other stuff. Don't use your identity as a password. And never ever save your password. Whenever you log in, just make sure to log out. Never leave anything logged in. Don't be lazy entering your password each and every time. Those simple steps can prevent big hassle down the road. We have to learn how to live with the existence of social media and existence of smart devices. I think average American person has more than 10, 20 accounts on every aspect. So the average American person has many passwords to manage. You are right, it is difficult to remember all of those, but develop a simple mechanism that you know and you remember only. Then you will be good.
Max?
Yeah, it comes down to, and everyone's touched on it, but just a ton of common sense. And that's true for me too. I use a password manager and I try to follow best practices when it comes to all my passwords. And I've got all the latest tooling installed on my machine, especially since in the role that I have, I'm a bigger target than most, right? If for some reason I'm vulnerable, then the cascade effects on our business are going to be huge versus maybe someone who doesn't have access to so much. So, for me, it's moving slower. I may not be as productive or move as quick as some of my coworkers simply because I am a bigger target and have to be more vigilant when it comes to every piece of digital content that comes through. And also, as Carrie mentioned, the social engineering piece, right? I'm talking to a vendor. There just always has to be a second set of eyes on who that vendor is, what their goal is, what information are they looking to acquire from me, what am I telling them, both explicitly and implicitly about my business. So it just requires a lot of careful thinking in just about every interaction, and trying not to be too exhausted by it.
Yeah, what you're saying makes me concerned also about our tech stack. Our tech stack is growing and growing and growing and growing. We're constantly adding new things lately. Everybody wants to innovate in our technology, and everything wants to be integrated with our PMS. I mean, it seems like that would be impossible to manage your security. And of course, our property management systems want to charge us a bundle, especially across multiple hotels, to add a tech stack so that they can be part of that integration, even though the provider of that technology says we don't need to do it in partnership with we can just pull a report or whatever. And do we always need to go through the PMS and pay that bill? Or do you feel those things are pretty safe because they've worked on the safety ahead of time?
Well, it really depends. If there's a true integration between the systems, there's typically a certification process. So if there is a direct connection, say, between the property management system and the point of sale system, or the property management system and the access control system, like the key system, there's typically a thorough vetting that happens with the API connection. So the application programming interface, the way that those two pieces of software communicate. Typically, there's going to be a standard enforced between both of those software vendors that each has to meet for that connection to be established. But that's not true if, for example, you're setting up a report scheduler from the PMS or the sales system to email a report to another system. In that case, then there is no certification between those two systems, and it's up to the hotelier to make sure for each of those vendors that they are compliant. So you can always ask, and that's a broad term, but you can always ask your vendors for what's called an SOC, which is Security and Operations Control document. And in that document, they should detail in a very granular manner, essentially their IT infrastructure, how the data is transmitted at rest, how it's transmitted actively, what encryption they use, how do they secure their databases, are their databases on-prem or are they in the cloud, do they have physical security at their databases to prohibit unauthorized entry. It goes on and on. So I don't expect very many hoteliers to have that kind of interest, but the management company should quarterback that for you at your behalf, or your managed service provider, to just look at these vendors and make sure that they are who they say are and they're following some best practices.
So if you have something like a business intelligence tool or something related to revenue management that's just pulling a report from the system in order to give you that dashboard, you can ask for that report, which is called what again?
It varies, right? But an SOC, a security and operations compliance document or controls document, generally they'll know what that is and be able to provide you with something.
Okay, so unless you really know what you're looking at when you're looking at the report, you probably, even though I hope that this conversation has opened a lot of eyes, raised some questions in your own mind and given you some thoughts about things that you should check and some new habits that we can perhaps get better at. This is just a smattering of knowledge so that you know what questions to ask and what you should be looking for. But of course, that's no replacement from hiring a professional who is an expert at that. We do need that assistance, and you all have been so helpful. Max, Murat, Carrie, it's been great seeing you all again, and I thank you so much for providing your expertise to HSMAI. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
For HSMA teams, we are not having a meeting in August, as far as I know. So we will notify you by email and on our LinkedIn page. Be sure to follow the LinkedIn page for the South Carolina HSMAI, and we'll let you know when our meeting is coming up in September or so. Thank you so much. See you then. Bye.
Thanks.
Right.
Bye.